I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views.
Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. Independent media matters, and your support makes it possible. If Parallax Views has challenged your thinking, exposed you to new ideas, or simply kept you company on your commute, now's the time to help sustain it. Listen, share, and if you can, support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. If you want, you can also make a one-time donation by contacting me at parallaxviewspod@protonmail.com. I can give you a link to my PayPal page if you contact me that way. Let's show what listener-supported media can do. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. Before we get to this edition of the show, I have to say that I took about a week off due to the events that occurred last week. I wanted the temperature to cool a bit before releasing any new episodes. However, I did do a show with Jason Myles and the crew over at This Is Revolution about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and you're going to hear that conversation on this edition of Parallax Views. This was recorded, I believe, last Thursday, but I think it was worth putting out there for those who don't follow This Is Revolution. You'll hear commentary from myself and others on this edition of the show pertaining to the Charlie Kirk assassination. I also want to remind you, dear listeners, that I am entirely listener-funded, so your support on Patreon would really help this show out, especially right now. It's very difficult doing what is essentially a one-man operation. That said, I have to thank my one sponsor, Mike Swanson of Wall Street Window. Check out wallstreetwindow.com for the best trading news. I just found out from one of my listeners they got a 48% return on investment from one of Mike's trading tips. So Mike's Wall Street Window newsletter is very useful. Check it out, wallstreetwindow.com. And if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. With that out of the way, I hope you'll enjoy this conversation. Or not enjoy, but I hope you'll find it interesting and informative and thoughtful and sort of contextualizing of the current moment. Because this very, very, very tense moment. And there's a lot of concern over political violence right now. That's really the main topic of conversation on this episode, and I think it's important to talk about. So, with that being said, let's get right to it with my appearance on This Is Revolution.
Greetings, I'm your host, Jason Myles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast for all the returning listeners, subscribers, and of course, our very valued patrons. So glad to have you back. To those new to the channel, welcome. Thank you for taking a moment to check us out. If you dig what we're doing, please hit like and, of course, subscribe. It is a passive gesture that goes a long way in promoting the channel. Just a brief reminder that if you dig the wide variety of programming we provide here on TIR and you want to make sure we can stay on the air, become a patron or a paid YouTube subscriber. When you become a patron or paid YouTube subscriber, you get early access to the audio-only podcast. The Crisis Papers, also issue 10, is up now. Don't work yourself into a shoot. Roger Jackson, Trump, and kayfabe. And you get access to the champagne rooms, past and present, and you get movie night access. So for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year, you get the satisfaction that your small donation goes a long way keeping this show on the air. Now, let's talk about why you people are really here. The death of Charlie Kirk. Yesterday, we saw another assassination. This time, it wasn't a healthcare CEO profiting off the suffering of millions trapped in a for-profit system. In the run-up to the presidential election, Donald Trump's campaign was not just revived, but supercharged when an assassin's bullet missed him and struck an innocent bystander. Just weeks ago, Robin Westman opened up fire in a church, killing 2 children. And now, many of us watched some in real time as a bullet tore through the neck of Charlie Kirk, a man doing what he loved, telling college students that Black people are inherently violent, that trans people are an abomination, and that socialism leads to straight totalitarianism. Kirk, alongside Ben Shapiro, was part of a new generation of conservative media stars who rose to prominence by owning college students. Their videos, designed for virality more than dialogue, made them both famous and infamous. Kirk wasn't a power broker or an oligarch. He was a loudmouth with a microphone, a performer who mastered political kayfabe. Like pro wrestling fans, people came in droves to cheer, to jeer, to be a part of the circus. A friend who once debated Kirk told me that Kirk was clearly trying to, at one point, style himself as the next William F. Buckley, a role he was never really equipped to play. Kirk's audience, for all their talk about doing their research, didn't want debate. They wanted confirmation bias, an echo chamber dressed up as intellectual rigor. That's the important thing to remember about Charlie Kirk's death. He was a media figure with limited reach. He didn't shape foreign or domestic policy. He debated unprepared undergrads and helped convert a few apathetic young people to the Republican Party, or so we assume. Meanwhile, Democrats alienate young voters while Trump's campaign thrives on vibes. Did Kirk help? Sure. Was he essential? Hardly. Believing Charlie Kirk was central to MAGA is like believing Sam Seder single-handedly stopped forced vote. He had help. Online pundits don't hold the keys to power. They're hustling merch, subscriptions, and clout. I'm convinced Kirk was a true believer, though. Unlike the radio shock jocks before him, he wasn't cashing any cushy syndication checks. He built Turning Point USA, a conservative campus organization, and launched Candace Owens, another pundit heavy on vibes and light on facts. But the real power players, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, weren't the targets. Instead, a guy who argued with 19-year-olds will now dominate news cycles and serve as justification for a White House crackdown on so-called far-left extremist violence. Will the troops descend on Salt Lake City, or will this embolden the next authoritarian crackdown in a blue city like Oakland, Seattle, or LA? Here's the harder question, one we've raised before. Is anyone actually ready for political violence? The American left is fragmented, academic, and online. You can't live stream a revolution. There are drones, tanks, SWAT teams. Is your anarchist polycule prepared for a shootout? Can you dress a wound? Survive a blackout when power, water, and Wi-Fi are cut off? Can you pick a lock, shoot a firearm, start a fire? What do you do with your dead? How do you handle sewage? Some will celebrate Charlie Kirk's death. I won't shed tears and I won't offer prayers. But here's the truth. He wasn't what was stopping your revolution. He wasn't the reason Trump persists. He was just a young, dumb blowhard who learned how to game outrage economy. Now, here to have a more broader discussion than my preamble, I'm just going to bring everybody in because there's so many dudes in here. Please welcome Pascal Robert, my co-host. In Toussaint, the voice of reason.
Not a dude.
Deep State Cuba, the Ewok killer. C. Derek Varn, the guy that yells at everybody. My fellow dude in the cheap seat, JG Michael. And of course, historian, good friend, and constant TIR contributor, Alexander Herbert. I'll start with Cuba because he's got the shortest time frame as he is in orbit right now in one of the Star Destroyers on his way to Tatooine. Cuba.
So I'll just point out some of the obvious things that are appropriate to say at this moment. No country that considers itself a democracy can have politics through assassination. And it is a fundamental failure of civilized society if speech is of any kind is an opportunity for lethal violence. Democracy requires that we respect differences of opinion. Without that, the door is open to the very law that was supposed to protect Charlie Kirk is that which we're going to be relying on in the next days and weeks to prevent the retaliation from the people outraged at what happened to him. And there's no certainty that it will hold, but nonetheless, Charlie Kirk wasn't the cause of all of that. He's just another dead man at this point.
Oof.
And I wanted to bring up a different dead man, Ernst von Rath. He was born in 1909 to an aristocratic German family, and he joined the Nazi Party in 1932. That was the year that Hitler made his big breakthrough electorally, and it served young Ernst quite well in his career at the diplomatic corps. After a brief tour in Bucharest, he ended up in Paris, which was a plum posting. And things were going well for the young careerist, opportunist, budding fascist, until he ran into Herschel Grünspan. Grünspan was born in Germany. We could describe him as a German Jew, but because of the laws in place at the time and the fact that his parents had moved from the Russian Empire to Germany in 1911, they had no official citizenship. And in one of the anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic actions of the Nazi regime in 1938, they were rounded up and taken to the Polish border, dumped unceremoniously, where they languished in a camp, sending letters begging young Herschel for help. He could secure none. So instead, he requested a meeting at the German embassy in Paris, at which point, when he was introduced to Ernst von Rath, the third secretary there, he fired 3 bullets. Ernst von Rath languished, receiving special ministrations from Hitler's personal doctors that were flown over in order to try to save his life. But on November 9th, 1938, he died. And the response was swift. Stormtroopers, members of the Nazi Party, really anybody who had an axe to grind, was let loose on the population, the Jewish population of Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland, those territories having been annexed. 30,000 Jewish men were rounded up and sent to camps. The death toll at the time was reckoned at 91, but with subsequent deaths from injuries, the deaths of people in captivity, and suicides from the abuse and sexual violence that was perpetrated on that night, that it's estimated to be over 1,000 lives claimed on Kristallnacht. Hitler personally called Ernst von Roth a great hero and posthumously awarded him high honors. I'm not going to compare Charlie Kirk and Ernst von Roth, although they were similar in age. They kind of had the whole big head, small face thing, but these are superficial similarities. Nor am I going to compare the American right with National Socialists of Hitler's Germany. After all, President Trump has pointed out that that may be the cause, the underlying cause of all of this violence. And after all, the United States is not Nazi Germany. Donald Trump is not Adolf Hitler. And I think that this would be an extraordinary opportunity to demonstrate that fact by, in this time of great sensitivity and high political polarization, if the Trump-led federal government took all steps necessary to prevent the type of outpouring of violence and targeting of political dissidents and disfavored minorities that bedeviled Germany in those nights in 1938. Now, as for everybody else, if you belong to one of the groups that Trump associates with the radical left, if you are worried that you might be conflated with sort of people. After all, the gunman has not been identified. We don't know who it is. We don't know why they did it. But already, people of power and influence associated with the MAGA movement have made their conclusions and drawn up their list of enemies. If you might fall within that list, then the most important thing to do is to look after your safety. Don't respond. Don't draw attention to yourself. Don't celebrate. Don't provoke, because the likelihood that the law will be there to protect you is dwindling moment by moment. And every utterance that's been made by people in power has added fuel to the fire rather than reduced it. So my recommendation is, as much as possible, try to avoid drawing attention to yourself, blend in, evade, escape. Consider the places that might be dangerous to go and try to stay away from there. And identify the people in your life that you can trust, the places that are safe, and try your best to both know where the refuge is and to create a refuge for people who are more vulnerable than you are. The situation is serious and seems to be escalating. Political violence tends to beget more political violence. And in this community, I think the most important thing to do is try to, as best we can, look after one another rather than chase the fantasy of transformation, propaganda of the deed leading to anywhere but the grave. That's it.
Pascal Robert, I know you have something to say.
Yeah, I think that what happened to Charlie Kirk was a tragedy for the American body politic overall. And I echo Kuba's sentiments that it's never satisfactory to use violence to silence political speech, even if it's political speech that we find abhorrent. Obviously, anyone who watches this show knows that Charlie Kirk's politics were far from my politics. But at the same time, watching the man be assassinated with a bullet to the neck, blood spewing therefrom, causing his death, was not a pretty thing. It was rather shocking. And at the same time, he said some rather outrageous things, offensive things to many communities that I care about, and many communities that I have seen victimized in my lifetime by political violence. That being said, I think that we have to be vigilant to try to maintain our composure at these moments and do not exacerbate the capacity for our political opposition to take the advantage, because they have the ball right now to spike it in our face by taking actions that are going to be punitive simply because we disagree with them. And I would hope that we have more sound response to their provocations than to meet fire with fire.
Alex, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I can add my 2 cents. I mean, I agreed with most of what Kuba said, and of course Pascal too. I don't think it's something that should be celebrated in any way. Of course, like we all recognize, Charlie Kirk said some very mean and offensive things, but you should also keep in mind the other side of the coin is that we hear to them say offensive things as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that it's worth thinking about that in light of, you know, his defense of free speech and yada yada. That was kind of just his way of saying more offensive things, but it is what it is. And you know, free speech is something that we ostensibly hold in high regard in this country, and that's what he was doing. It wasn't things that we liked to hear, but it's also we say things that they don't like to hear. I will add that as a Marxist, I think that when it comes to political terrorism, I mean, there's been a ton of work about the Marxist approach to terrorism and how, you know, we don't condone it and how and why we shouldn't condone it. As Kuba said, you know, violence often begets more violence, but not just that, violence begets reactionary politics. Not only that, but the other Marxist additive here is that political violence in the form of terrorism, which is what it is, domestic terrorism, is a means of distracting would-be radicals from the work that actually needs to be done. You know, as certain Marxists that I respect have argued in the past, it's more effective and more useful for somebody who is radicalized in their view of politics and socioeconomics to be out among the working class and actually trying to, you know, conscientize them, to turn them into actual breathing, thinking Marxists and revolutionaries in that sense. And when you engage in terrorism, you're doing the opposite of that. You are, on the one hand, eliminating somebody that would be an effective radical. You know, the guy that shot him, we don't know who he is, but maybe, you know, his energy would have been better spent talking to the students that were there, that, you know, and asking them, what are you doing here? Do you actually support this stuff? You know, advocating in the moment rather than assassinating. Because for me, one really important aspect of Marxism is discipline, self-discipline. We are disciplined in our convictions, and we're disciplined in the way that we communicate with other people, and we're disciplined in our ideas. And so when you engage in political terrorism, you're sacrificing that discipline. And that's why I really, I know this has been said a million times, I really don't like the word leftist, because in that sense, I don't identify with anarchists in any way, shape, or form. There's nothing about anarchism or propaganda of the deed or any of that that I've ever agreed with. And that being said, I mean, that's the one thing that I would add to Kuba's talk in the beginning here, is that if you're not cut out to put yourself in potentially dangerous situations, or as if one of your chat said, or somebody said it, somebody quoted someone about maintaining your peace. If you're not comfortable sacrificing your peace, then yeah, you should probably seek coverage and seek to kind of lay low. But as a disciplined Marxist and as an academic, it's sort of my responsibility to continue to be out there and to state plainly and very clearly to people that I don't condone what happened. In fact, I feel bad for Charlie Kirk, regardless of his family or whatever, and the ideas that I didn't agree with. Everybody's right that, you know, he's going to be martyred. The process has already started. I've already seen a meme of Zoran Mamdani, a right-wing person, that said it's our turn now. So, you know, like that rhetoric is already starting. But this, what makes Marxists, in my view, distinct from anarchists and from other people in the progressive left is, again, our discipline, our ability to be out there, and our conviction that it's our presence, it's our example that provides a kind of inspirational move towards consciousization on the part of the working class. And so I'm not hiding. I'm a very clear Marxist academic. I just published an article on my Substack today about Marxism and terrorism, where I kind of outline all of this stuff. I still work with the party. I still go out with people and you know, engage with working class. Still go to union meetings if I have to. And yeah, things can get very scary. They're already sort of starting to. Yeah, I mean, you know, the world is really bizarre right now. We just had a AI video posted by the White House today, which is kind of nuts, considering the pictures that came out that seem to suggest that Donald Trump may have suffered a stroke. That's all hearsay. The other thing that I will add is the thing about the conspiracies. I mean, I have friends that instantly went to, this is a Mossad psyop, and you know, just 2-3 days prior to this, Charlie Kirk had voiced some concern about funding Israel and all of that. And the thing that I will add about that is, I'm not going to deny people's ability to believe in conspiracies if that's what they want to do, but I will urge you to think about how reducing things like this, whether it's Charlie Kirk or Luigi or the assassination attempts on the, what is it, Minnesota representative, whatever it is, reducing these things to conspiracy, again, distracts us from what could be a potentially fruitful possibility of flipping this in our own benefit. And that is by saying, again, flatly, squarely, that Marxists do not condone political violence. And in fact, you know, I've had people say, well, what about Cuba and Che Guevara and yada, yada. I mean, this is different than anti-colonial violence. It can't really be compared. If you look at domestic Marxist groups, none of them engaged in propaganda of the deed like this, right? And, you know, you could say, you know, the Black Panthers carried guns, but the Black Panthers were a defense organization. They carried guns to intimidate and to defend their community. So again, we have to separate domestic violence, domestic terrorism from anti-colonial terrorism as, you know, things that we can condone and not condone. But in general, I agree with everything that's been said so far, that it's not anything worth celebrating. And in fact, you know, just on a basic human level, I don't think that, I mean, there are very few people, I would say, but I don't think anybody deserves that kind of death, that kind of spectacle death, right? It's very medieval, the way that it happened, and the way that and I'm guilty of this, the way that the video was shared and it was circulated and everybody kind of was resharing it. And it led me to have some pretty deep conversations with friends who, you know, are kind of fence walkers on the left about the role of violence as spectacle, right? And why it is that Americans right now seem to be medieval in our penchant to view violence, right? We want to watch somebody get executed. And there's probably another explanation of why horror genre is so prevalent right now, again, because people are satisfied with it. And it's kind of sick. And it's like Kuba said, what we have to focus on is the roots of this fascination with violence and death. And by relegating it all to a conspiracy and just reducing it like that, it stops us from actually having that useful analysis, in my opinion. It gives us an out from thinking hard about it. And that, again, that being said, in 5 years, it could come out that Charlie Kirk was killed by a Mossad psyop. Fine, whatever. But let's spend the time right now actually analyzing how this reflects America right now, how it does reflect a really sick civil society right now, a very sick sociocultural base right now. And so, I mean, that's what I have for right now. Interested to hear other people what they have to say.
JG, did you want to say something?
Yeah, first I was going to say, I essentially agree with someone like Noam Chomsky, who would say, even if your views are abhorrent, I defend your rights to say them. I think that's all I can really say about how I feel about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I think there are two important things that I want to discuss here. The first being, I don't think people should jump the gun in analyzing the assassination itself, in the sense that I believe as of this time, we still don't have a killer and we still don't have a motive. It could have been a groyper. It could have been a leftist. It could have been a member of the Order of Nine Angles. It could have been a crazy person that thought aliens were telling them to do it. We don't know. The second thing is, if it is indeed an act of political violence, I think people have to start thinking about where political violence springs from and the fact that historically it has happened in the past. And that's not me condoning it, but I do think we're in a moment where we could see more of it. And I think that we live in a system currently, the sort of liberal democratic system we live in, the political order is under strain. And there are people that are saying, I no longer respect the proceduralism. I don't feel bound by its rules. That's where I think political violence springs from. Whether you look at someone like Timothy McVeigh or the Weathermen in the 70s, these are all people that said, I no longer respect the reigning political order's legitimacy. So I don't feel bound by its rules. And I think people have to really talk about that being the root of political violence. At least that's how I see political violence. I think that's the root of it. And I think people have to discuss that more. I don't have much more to add other than that, but I think people really have to home in on why political violence occurs without condoning it and just essentially analyzing it in a way that's purely analytical.
C. Derek Varn. Oh, shit.
So I guess I come at the end of this first round of commenters, and I'm going to say something a little bit different. I agree with everybody saying about the efficacy of propaganda of the deed, and it's the efficacy that I think a lot about. Historically, it does not lead to organization. It inspires things it might, but usually it inspires reaction. Chomsky said that, not Chomsky, Trotsky said it, Lenin said it, hell, even Stalin said it. My issues about the way we talk about this, though, do kind of make me feel a little strange, because political violence is, sure, it's increasing in the United States, but it's been a norm in the United States for most of American history. I mean, we can think of like maybe half decades that didn't have a bunch of it, but bombings, assassinations, assassinations of media figures, assassinations of politicians, assassination attempts on politicians. This is incredibly common in our history. All right. From McKinley forward, and I'm not even getting into the 19th century. The number of bombings we saw in the 70s from new communist groups that did nothing, the number of right-wing bombings we saw in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that actually did do a fair
Oklahoma
amount.
City.
Oklahoma City, the Atlanta Olympic bombing. I mean, I can go on and on and on. My point is, what seems to shock everybody is that this is a influencer media figure. And for people who are increasingly influential in politics, they've been relatively untouched from it. Now, that doesn't mean I think this is good or to be celebrated. I don't. In fact, JG's thing that we should analyze this relatively coldly is actually probably correct. And I just wanted to bring a few facts to bear because this touches me directly in ways that it doesn't touch a lot of other people here. I live in Salt Lake. I have been to Utah Valley University's campus multiple times. All right, I'm not going to go into any more than that, but I'm going to say that yesterday I didn't have time to listen to X or Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok because I had to do real things in response to this. Orem is in Utah Valley County. Utah Valley County is one of the most conservative urban areas in the country. UVU is not a conservative school. It's not like Liberty University or BYU, but it is a commuter school. It is a commuter school with an open quad where you see these kinds of things all the time. Now, not the violence, that's actually incredibly unheard of, but influencers, media figures, various people go there because it's a place that's probably about 55% liberal, 45% moderate conservative LDS. You can see where that's going to go. If you're doing this kind of thing, it's a place to go. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about the shooter. We don't know much about it, but here's a few things I can tell you for sure. What the FBI has released a bunch of different pictures, and even some of the people in law enforcement say maybe we shouldn't trust these pictures yet. They're just persons of interest. People have been trying to do AI reconstructions of them and figure out who they are. Good luck on that. If the gun that was found outside of UVU is correct, it's an old hunting rifle. It would have had a non-removable magazine that was small. It would have been full bore barreled, but it would have been traceable to anybody because it would have been bought used. Probably a fairly old rifle. It's a bolt action. It's going to be more stable at long distances than something like an AR-17, and it had a scope. It would have been hard to take apart and dismantle. So the person had to know the campus really well to get that up there, because even if you took it apart and took the barrel and the stock off, you're going to have a hard time fitting that into a backpack. And you're going to have a very hard time taking a screwdriver and putting it back together fast enough. The shot was done at a time when there had been maximum people changing classes. Most of the students at UVU at the time did not even know that Charlie Kirk was really on campus. Yes, there was a 6,000 signature protest against him, but it didn't reach the threshold for UVU to take seriously. That's 7,000 actually. It's hard to say, beyond the fact that the shooter knew the campus well enough to know how to get on top of a building and knew the time of the classes, anything else about that. All right. We don't have any idea the ideology. We don't have any idea what if it was personal, but what we can say is the person knew the campus and they knew a fair amount about shooting. But despite what you hear about people screaming about Mossad and professional agents, a standard hunter who is trained in the West could have made that shot. It would have been between 140 and 180 yards, at most 200 yards, but it's actually been whittled down in debates about where the shooter was. With a scope and 20 to 40 hours of range experience, which is not hard to get in Utah, because this is not a wooded area. This is a desert. If you go hunting, you're hunting long range. you would probably have those skills. Also, Utah is a complete free range carry state. I can carry in Utah. I can conceal carry in Utah without a permit. I have said permit. I don't carry anymore, but I do have it. So these are all things to consider when you're blabbing your mouth. All right. Orem is in a heavily urban area, but it is not a large city. It is a suburb of Provo. It is in one of the most highly densely LDS areas in the country. So I want to spell this out for people when they're speculating. UVU would not expect any of this. There would have been no security there. In fact, if what people have told me from campus is true, there wouldn't have been even emergency vehicles there. He was probably, and I don't know this for sure, carted off to the hospital in an SUV. Now, the media has been utterly irresponsible in the way they talk about this. They didn't even do due diligence. The person who broke Kirk's desk to the public was the president, not the media. Probably because no one thought anything important would happen in Orem. So, I contextualize this for you. All right. Now, there's been a lot of talk of civil war from both sides, mostly from the right, but even from the left. And a lot of people saying, oh, this can't happen here. We don't have geographical sides. I do want to say that that's, for our Civil War, historically, that was true. But I want to contextualize this for you as a person who's actually seen political violence of the non-propaganda by the deep variety. All right. And I've lived through Al-Sisi's Egypt, where people were abducted, arrested, shot, and killed. Bombs blew up. One that was 5 blocks away from where I lived, another that was a neighborhood over, and I could see it from my apartment. When I was in Mexico from 2013 to 2015, I lived through the Zena City Lower Cartel War. I do know a little bit about political and organized violence. So my point in this is that if you're going to talk about Civil War, I want you to understand what you're talking about. The bloodiest conflict in U.S. history per capita was the U.S. Civil War. It only killed 2% of the population because it was geographically divided. Non-geographically divided civil wars tend to be much bloodier. The Russian Civil War led to a loss of the population of about 5%. Between that, the two revolutions prior and the starvation regime imposed upon Russia by the rest, about half of the male population died before you even got to World War II, where another half of the male population died. In the Taiping Rebellion in China, about 10% of the Chinese population died. All right. I don't know why we call it a rebellion. It was really a civil war, and it was a very brutal one, way more brutal than the U.S. Civil War. Now, I say this because there is a way in which people are talking about this because this is all simulated for them. And one of the things that Yasha Levine's point is, if you live in this spectacle forever, it will eventually be real. We can pretend all we want to, that it does not have an effect on the real world, but you know that's bullshit at this point. Now, in saying that, I'm also going to say people talking about whatever on Twitter, while it may put individual targets on their back if there's repression coming, and there might very well be, I'm going to say the shit posting probably isn't going to change that. I'm not saying people should do it. I personally don't. But if this has already happened, the event that has made it, it's going to make this happen, has already begun. The question now is, what are you going to do to respond to it? And are you going to be responsible and disciplined or not? because I can tell you that all moral considerations aside, and I do have moral considerations personally, but I'm not here to lecture you about that. All moral considerations aside, this is unlikely to go the way anyone expects it to go if it continues to heat up. These things spiral very quickly. You know, and there's all kinds of comparisons to like the days of lead in Italy. Or the various kinds of violence, in Germany, up until the 1970s. My thing about that is those, however you feel about them, were done by organizations. This does not seem to be. I mean, gust of popular feeling do not a organization make one way or the other.
Mhm.
And as for who it affects, why people I mean, we've seen the right-winger sphere just declare open war. We've seen people declare that they know what this is in all kinds of directions. I literally saw an account that was pushed by Facebook to me, not one that I followed. As soon as I signed in today to make sure that I understood the time for this, because God knows I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook anymore. But it was pushing that this is a Mossad act, and it had 10,000 likes. Normies, however you define that, are getting this stuff now. I know people who did not know who Charlie Kirk was, who have talked to me about it in the last 24 hours and have even mentioned the conspiracy theories. So if you think this is going to stay contained to the internet, you are wrong.
I think you said something that was very important. For all of us who are very much online, I don't think we have to we realize many people in America had no idea who Charlie Kirk was. Many people who are not online, who are relatively, serious consumers of news, did not know who Charlie Kirk was. So they are being introduced to this guy as we speak. Along with that, it's going to mean that one way or the other, people are going to be exposed to his thought, his ideas, his words, and we have to reckon with the fact that may cause a radicalization of a second tier of individuals to his worldview in light of his death.
Toussaint, did you want to add something?
I did. Thank you. I just want to say that we have a lot of viewers today. I hope all of you guys hit like and subscribe and become patrons and join the show on YouTube and tell your friends about this, because I've watched a lot of hours of coverage about Charlie Kirk on different podcasts and the news, and I haven't seen anything like this anywhere. So please do support us. I've been enjoying the great analysis and the show so far. Charlie Kirk was not a fan of Martin Luther King Jr., but we are friends with at least one Reverend Doctor on this show. His name is John Graham. He posted something on Facebook, and I'd like to read just part of it. It might be a little remedial for our audience, but you can pass this on to your normie friends and family if it doesn't work for you. He says, please be careful who you allow to help you process these intense feelings. Please be very careful who you allow to interpret yesterday for you. Please be especially careful who you allow to tell you what people who aren't like you are, quote unquote, really feeling and thinking right now. So I think particularly for our friends who don't know who Charlie Kirk was, this might be helpful for them. But I think also for us who are more in the know and more familiar with Charlie Kirk, I think we should avoid the pressure or temptation to make a public relations statement on social media right now. I don't know that it adds anything but noise to what's going on, and it could put a target on your back right now. Uh, I also want to add that people are already sanitizing Charlie Kirk's image.
Mm.
They are repeating that he was a husband and a father.
Mhm.
And it bothers me personally because I know that there are a lot of men who are violent or abusive or say hateful things or just put a lot of hate and negativity out into the world who have wives and children, and they are able to sort of use them as a shield. So I hope that maybe we can start to dismantle that kind of shielding, that kind of protection that a lot of people do benefit from. I had a little bit more that I wanted to say about Black people's response to this. There are Black people saying this is not our fight, stand down, but that has been the call for a while now. I'm not entirely sure what that is supposed to be about.
What are Black people supposed to fight?
Exactly. Charlie Kirk certainly
Are
had a
we
lot to
fighting Kirk? Or are we fighting? What are we doing?
he died saying things about Black people. In a
So,
way,
yeah,
it does certainly involve us. You do
sure.
have people online like the Cartier family. I don't know if you've heard of them.
The diamond people, they make nice watches.
They're Black dudes,
Make
and
those
they're
watches?
right wingers. And they made a video defending Charlie Kirk and mourning because he was nice to them. And he took them on a trip and invited them somewhere.
Hmm.
So,
Got some chitlins and fatback.
yeah,
It's
there
generally
do,
all it takes, you know.
there do seem to be a number of Black men online
Mhm.
defending Charlie Kirk right now. And these are the ones
Some of
who
it
have
is fake,
drifted
though.
towards the right already.
Some of it is fake. I've seen, I'm not even trying to be funny, 20 posts from
Mhm.
20 NFL players that didn't post it about Charlie Kirk and donating to their family.
I think some of those people are going to start learning more about Charlie Kirk, as someone said earlier, and then maybe they will also have some kind of rightward drift. But to an earlier point made about propaganda of the deed, we don't know who did this and what their motivations were, but we do know that there's something going on with the historically Black colleges and universities right now. So it's possible that this is related and they are being targeted. So, I mean, just something to keep in mind that these things boomerang back to the left. And if any of us are going to consider engaging in that, we definitely shouldn't.
Charlie Kirk brought out two sons of inner race women, boy. God
Well, let me ask a question. We'll start with Toussaint since she's right here. Do figures like Charlie Kirk actually influence political outcomes, or are they just performers in the outrage economy?
They absolutely do influence political outcomes. Charlie Kirk is being put up as a person who helped to tip the scales in Trump's favor in this last election. He has conventions for influencers that or aspiring right-wing influencers, teaching them what to say, giving them talking points, probably also giving them financial support, and it helps. I think it helps their cause. It helps the right. They have a lot of voices and increasingly diverse voices parroting the same talking points now. And he's instrumental in that. That is what Turning Points USA does. It's not just Charlie Kirk, who didn't graduate from college, going to colleges and arguing with college students. It was
Yeah,
also setting up these influencers to.
he's supposed to have done that, but he has been quite unsuccessful in some of his projects. I believe he was
Mhm.
supposed to help a right wing takeover of Arizona.
Of what?
Of Arizona.
Mm.
That didn't happen. So you speak very highly of the man. Pascal, do you have something to say about it in regards to that? Do you think that he actually sways elections?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I'm going to echo the voice of people who are so self-absorbed that they are scant to acknowledge others, and that would be the Trump administration. I see Trump as being someone who's so self-absorbed that he would be very unlikely to acknowledge anyone else's role in his rise. And Trump, from his own mouth, said Charlie Kirk was instrumental in his political success in the second election. So, to answer the question as if I have conclusive evidence as to how salient Kirk was, I don't have that answer, Jason. But
Mhm.
based on what is being said rhetorically by people within the Trump administration and those within the atmospherics of MAGA, they are saying that Charlie Kirk was a factor.
Kuba, you have something you want to add?
I think that there's been a lot of attention placed on the particular rhetoric, Charlie Kirk as an influencer, Charlie Kirk as a personality, but I think that misses the more tangible and important way that he made an impact, which was through his organization. In a lot of ways, the university campuses were considered to be enemy territory, fallow ground for the conservative movement. Basically surrendered to radical Marxist professors and blue-haired, gender-fluid humanities majors. Now, certainly that hasn't been entirely reversed. They're not all turning into MAGA factories. However, the fact that Turning Points USA has a presence, a chapter on virtually every campus in the United States, that there is a regular calendar of events, that there is an organizational structure that people, that conservatives can join, that the apolitical are exposed to these views before their own ideological values can gel. All of that has had a considerable cumulative effect, and it is the organization and the penetration of spaces which previously had been much more uniformly left-leaning and resourced enough to serve as incubators for people to go on to have political careers or protest movements to gel into usually Democratic Party grifts, but sometimes something else. Now, that has become contested ground, and Turning Point USA has made some victories. And while in a few high-profile cases, sure, Charlie Kirk staked a particular position and picked a battle which he lost, but the very resilience points to the durability and the importance of his organization. He can afford to lose an electoral contest in Arizona, and he still sticks around. He makes the organizational structure helps maintain and persist this ideological tendency. And I think that when we obsess too much about the rhetoric and lose sight of the organization, we're constantly talking about how the left needs to organize, how the left is missing organization, how we need to sign up people, how we need to create institutions. Turning Points USA, unfortunately, is a successful case of that on the right.
Kuba, thank you very much for taking the time to join us while you are on that Star Destroyer mission. Have a very good rest of your evening, comrade.
Thank you, Cuba. Nice shirt.
I have another question for you guys. How much power do online personalities, and anybody can jump in, how much power do online personalities really have compared to billionaires and political elites?
Can we talk? I want to actually talk about this because TPUSA is acceptable because of high-level organization. It has high-level organization because it has money. Now, before I hear the normal, the left doesn't have money. It depends on which left you're talking about. But the clearly, if you followed before, this erased all of our memory of what happened even yesterday, much less last week. You were following the Chorus scandal and the 1620 scandal and the fact that progressives have been fairly unsuccessfully trying to build up a counter network to replace MSNBC since it's not very effective anymore, and reach out through TikTok because they lost the Zoomer mojo in the middle of 2022 after October 7th. I say that because I think when we talk about someone like Kirk, we actually completely misunderstand his role. He had a role. He has ties to the administration, clearly. But his talking points tended to respond and co-opt other right-wing talking points and to make them more salient as an interface between, quote unquote, the populist right or the groypers or whoever the fuck you want to talk about in the right-wing great civil war of marginal groupings. And yes, Virginia, the white wings really aren't as united as you think they are, except behind the demagogic person of Trump. So someone like Kirk takes his cues and moves according to that, also trying to pull people into a more established traditional Republican field of money. And I'm not talking about like the Lincoln Project or the Bulwark or anything like that. I'm talking about things like the Claremont Institute and things like that. So yes, there's money behind Charlie Kirk. Influencers in general are not paid for by their views. And I hate to tell people this, but it's actually easier to funnel money through a Patreon or through live streams than it is through official channels. And particularly when you start having PACs doing things like buying additional ads. So when you try to separate an internet influencer from the money behind him, you're going to have a hard time doing that. Kirk's role is, as David Russell here is saying, was a boost man and an interfacer. All right. His talking points changed pretty profoundly depending on the time you were listening to him. Terry Prince USA sounded a lot more like post-Bush Republicans when they started than they do now. And that's Kirk reading the room, following the money, and interfacing accordingly. Now, that also means there's a lot of people on the right who hated him for not being radical enough. All right? But that's going to all go away now. It doesn't matter the reality after someone is martyred.
Nick Fuentes is one of them. Nick Fuentes was not a total fan of Charlie Kirk.
That's putting it mildly.
JG, did you want to add something?
I don't know if I can add anything with the billionaires thing. I do want to go back to the point I was trying to make, and I think Varn made it better earlier, that this political violence is not abnormal historically. If you look at the 1800s, it was certainly not abnormal. And I think what people should be concerned about is that we're moving back towards that. And to be honest, I think Charlie Kirk may have played a role in normalizing us towards that, because he was part of the Stop the Steal rally. Now, I'm not trying to sound like Rachel Maddow or anything, but the Stop the Steal rally was basically an incident where you had a lot of right-wing people saying, I no longer respect the legitimacy of the peaceful transition of power. They don't respect the system. They're saying, well, everything's been stolen. The election's stolen. I don't respect this. We're not going to play by the rules anymore. And again, I think that we're going to see a lot more of this type of violence from both right and left as you get certain people that say, I don't agree with the legitimacy anymore. I don't consider this government legitimate. I don't consider this political order, liberalism legitimate, and I'm not going to be bound by its rules. That I think is like the biggest thing I'm worried about right now. And I find it weird how people act like this. A lot of people are acting like this is like a new thing. I don't think it is. I think the Melissa Hortman shooting just 2 months ago is indicative of this. I thought January 6th was indicative of this. I think that the the two Trump assassinations attempts are indicative of this, and Pelosi's husband being beat with a hammer
We
is
forgot
indicative of
Pelosi's
this.
husband getting beat with the hammer.
And I think we're moving towards something, and we've seen it in the past. I think the Oklahoma City bombing was an example in the 90s. I think before that, we had the period of terror by the Bruder Schweigen, or the Silent Brotherhood, that led to the assassination of Alan Berg in the 1980s. 1980s to 1990s, we saw all that malicious stuff, right? And then I think before that, you had terror in the late 60s and 70s. There was a lot of social tumult. And then if you go back, like I said, to the 1800s, I mean, political violence was fairly commonplace and normalized in comparison to today. And I think that point is really being overlooked. We may be moving into a period where this is becoming normal again. And I don't think that's a good thing. I'm not like condoning that or saying that's great, but I do wonder if that's where we're moving towards. And I'd be interested in what both Derek and Pascal in particular have to say about that, because I think they both have like a good grasp on history.
Let's get Alex in here before we get to Pascal.
And Alex as well. I'm sorry.
Look at Alex. Looks like you went to political violence right now.
Yeah, I mean, I am a historian by profession, so I know something about history a little bit. But that also means that, you know, there's a lot of political science and contemporary stuff that, as much as my historical knowledge can shed light on the past history does rhyme. It doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes. You know, the knowledge is limited. What I will say about today, the world that we live in now, is a lot of, I think, because of social media, because of, you know, the podcast area and everything, because of all of this stuff where we are, because of wokeism, because of MAGA, et cetera, et cetera. I think we live in a time where a lot of people who don't know any better, they act as though, or they believe that culture is its own base in and of itself. You know, thinking about the base superstructure thing, I think people approach culture as a base in and of itself. And so in light of that, in response to the question about Charlie Kirk and his relative influence, I think that he really is much more influential than we like to give him credit for, maybe, or will be, because of the way that culture works nowadays, as a tool within of itself. I can't say that the same has been true throughout all history, because people weren't as connected and it wasn't as easy to spread ideas, and, you know, ideas is a key word here, ideas and information, as easily as it is now. And back to the question about history and political violence. I mean, yeah, we can drop moments of political violence in history and we can draw connections between them all. But something that, at least in the United States, with the exception of the Civil War, and maybe a few other isolated incidents, well, I think the Civil War is really the only one, in the Revolutionary War. We have to make the distinction between a moment of violent, sort of chaotic terrorism within the country, and what people, Lenin being one of them, had referred to as a revolutionary situation. We are not living in a revolutionary situation right now.
I agree with that.
Damn. Okay.
We are living in a moment of protracted violence. And the thing is that because culture plays such a salient role in the world that we live in right now, it's really easy for the anarchist belief that an assassination of somebody will be the trigger for a revolutionary situation. But there has never been, at least to my mind, an assassination in history that has precipitated directly a revolutionary situation. Now, some people would say, well, what about Franz Ferdinand? He didn't cause the First World War, right? His assassination was sort of the top of a long list of things that helped to facilitate a war that people had already known was on the verge. I mean, Christopher Clark has that great book, Sleepwalkers, where he talks about this, that people were expecting war for a very long time before it actually happened. The feud between Germany and Britain, the Russian foreign minister was writing about it 5 years before it even started. Even Lenin was writing about the inevitability of war between Germany and Britain like 10 years before it happened. So this idea that assassinations, the killing of somebody, political, whether Trump or whether Charlie Kirk, anybody within this cultural sphere in which we live in, the idea that that is somehow going to precipitate a revolutionary situation is farcical. And what it will do, and you all have been commenting on that, and because you're all intelligent and you get it, is that it's going to push the revolutionary situation forward, but not in the sort of leap and bound that anarchists might like to think it is. It's not a Franz Ferdinand moment, the way that moment was historicized to them in their school. Instead, it's going to make things a lot worse. I don't think that we're on the verge of a civil war right now myself. I personally think we still have a lot to go. And whether or not things get worse, I can say I probably do think that they are going to get worse, but we're not at the revolutionary situation yet. For that to happen, as I think Varn was alluding to, and also JB was also mentioning, you have to have a collapse of legitimacy, of a sense of legitimacy for the ruling clique right now. And we don't have that. All revolutionary situations have seen basically a turning of military or police forces against the ruling party, in a collapse of ruling legitimacy. And we don't have that yet. In fact, I think, as Jason was saying in the beginning, those who want a revolutionary situation right now, those on the left, who want to see a revolutionary situation, those anarchists in particular, who want to refer to, it's right to celebrate Charlie Kirk because this is sacred rage and it's an indigenous rite of passage, blah, blah, blah. It's some shit that I heard on social media that was really stupid. People who want to believe that that is the case, I don't think, as Jason said at the beginning, I don't think they're ready for a revolutionary situation. No. I don't think they can fight. I don't think, I mean, I don't want them on my side. If you ask me, in a revolutionary situation, the person that I want on my side is a police officer, a former police officer.
Or Marine.
Somebody who has lost all faith in the system as it works, who is trained, who knows how to use a gun, whether it's a police officer or a military, ex-military person, I don't really care. But those are the people that I want. And those are the people that actually do facilitate effective revolutionary situations.
I want to say something about civil war. I agree that we're not on the brink of civil war, but we can be on the brink of massive civil discontent. I think that that's actually what we're more on the way of leading towards than anything else.
I want to ask you guys one question before we go to the champagne room.
Can I add one more thing?
You just interrupt me, don't you?
Well, I'm
totally kidding. I'm totally kidding. Yeah.
I wanted to clarify something I said earlier. When I was talking about the idea of people not buying into the legitimacy of the political order we live under, which it's big L liberalism that we live under, liberal democracy. I don't mean to say that it's collapsing. I don't think it is. I think it's under stress from individual lone wolf actors who no longer believe in its legitimacy and therefore are going to break its rules. And I think that's where political violence comes from. And in a weird way, even though I don't agree with him often, I kind of agree with the journalist John Gaines, who said, I think we'll make it through this, because we have made it through other periods. Mm-hmm. The 70s was high on political violence, massively so. I mean, there's that whole book, I think it's Days of Rage, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we have gotten through periods. I just think that the system is under stress right now, and you have individual actors who are engaging in essentially political violence, and I don't think it will go anywhere good. I do think there could be a police state backlash to it, but I don't think it's like the legitimacy is collapsing. I think it's collapsing for individual people. There's like individual lone wolf actors that are not buying into it. So I hope that clarifies how I think about this a little bit more, because I think that wasn't clear earlier.
No, I understood that that's what you were saying. Jason, if I may, I put an article out of my Substack about this, but I opened with a quote that I want to read from one of the Russian Empire's most famous terrorists, advocates of propaganda of the deed, and actually a woman, because we only have one woman in this chat, so let's add another woman. If I may read her quote. This is from This is Vera Figner. This is from her Memoirs of a Revolutionary, where she talks about the process of radicalization and what brought her to violence. She says, if any group in our society had shown me a path other than violence, perhaps I would have followed it. But as you know, we don't have a free press in our country, and so ideas cannot be spread by written word. I saw no signs of protest, nor was literature producing changes in our social life. And so I concluded that violence was the only solution. I could not follow the peaceful path. And I think that it's really, that quote for me resonates with the way that a lot of people, I think, on the left, and I'm not including the socialist left or Marxist, I think a lot of people on the left, naive people, feel that way right now. That, and that's why, you know, assuming that this person is a liberal left or something like that, or even Luigi Mangione, right, had said explicitly that, or people have said explicitly that, you know, he's frustrated by a system in which there seems like there's no other way to handle it. And that isn't something that that is created by anybody except for the system itself. And that's why we have to continue our ruthless criticism of that system and also culture, I think. Again, I'll go back to that point about culture as a base in and of itself now.
What does that say about our culture? Is it dangerous to overestimate or underestimate figures like Charlie Kirk? Barn, you're muted. You muted yourself.
Yeah, both. Sorry.
Okay.
It is both dangerous to over and underestimate. I mean, we've talked about a lot of high level abstraction, and we talked about Lenin users both objective and subjective conditions, and the objective conditions include things like economic crisis, political crisis, but subjective conditions move the delegitimacy of all, not just some, all of the various ruling classes and divisions within them, period. All right. If you see this in China, because elite circulation has a long history of using discontented populism to prop up other factors in the elite. That's what Trump is. All these people complaining about Harvard are Harvard grads. Like, this is not a counter systemic or counter elite movement, but it has the appearance of being so. Now, one player to where I differ from JG probably, and to talk a little bit about this a bit, is I don't think the legitimacy of the big L liberal system is long-term salvageable, period. All right. I am the odd man out on this a lot of the time. That doesn't mean I think there's a real radical left hiding in the woodworks, waiting to replace it. In fact, I have no idea what replaces it. This particular crisis, I mean, we're talking about one assassination in a place where even when crime isn't very high, several thousand people die a day. I realize that not all deaths are created equal, right? But, this buried a school shooting on the same day with 3 dead. It happened just over in Evergreen, Colorado, which you might remember Evergreen, Colorado, because there's been multiple mass shootings there. So the idea that and actually JG and I have been having a long debate about this now for about 4 years. That the liberal system is going to fade away because of this. I agree with JG. It's probably not. But the idea that we're going to save this legitimacy, I find very frustrating. Because I don't think we can do that. I don't even know if it's worth doing. The bigger thing I think about right now, however, is we're always weirdly individualistic when we talk about individual acts like this, but we all become good determinists when we talk about large-scale systems. But one of the things the point I wanted to make about political violence is, why do you have a period where you don't see a lot of it between 1932 in 1964. That's the only period that's long, that's of any sustained length. There's a brief period in the late 1990s where we don't see a lot of it. There's a brief period during the middle of the Obama administration. You don't see a lot of it. But those are very brief periods. You're talking like 2 or 3 years. The post-war Fordist consensus period is the only period in the West that I can think of that has more than 10 years of sustained social peace. And instead of getting caught up in every individual action, that's what I think we should be looking at.
New Deal, fatback, and biscuits.
Right. The New Deal, the existence of the USSR, the beginnings of the anti-colonial revolutions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the context for that. None of that really exists in the same way now. Even the anti-colonial revolutions, there might be 4 or 5 of them right now. They're not really revolutions. They're not in that phase, but you don't see that same larger social milieu. And here's what you do see. All right. And this is my last point, and I'll turn over to Jason and shut the fuck up. There are more active conflicts right now that involve military grade violence than we have seen since World War II. And I'm not just talking about Gaza, and I'm not just talking about Russia and Ukraine. And that cannot be ignored, even if you are relatively isolated from it here, and even if it is not at all why this happened. Because, I mean, I'll be frank with you, we're talking about it as if if it's political violence. We don't really have an idea of why this happened, but we know it's going to be used for political violence, and I can promise you that, regardless of why it happened. Like, if it's just like we don't fully comprehend the first Trump attempted assassin, but it doesn't matter how that's going to be weaponized. Now, that died down because nobody could get a good angle on it, but that's not going to maintain forever, and eventually it's not going to matter, because in the spectacle and the speculation does eventually win out in the popular consciousness when social conditions and economic conditions are frayed. I learned that in Egypt. And weirdly, the person who I saw talk about that the most, and this, by the way, means he knows what he's fucking doing, was Tucker Carlson talking specifically about Egypt. In a debate with Greg Alterman in like 2005, Tucker Carlson pointed out the conspiracy theories are prevalent when social trust breaks down because larger economic and political conditions are frayed. All right. And in this interim, before you're in any kind of revolutionary period, whether you get to that or not, because there are subjective conditions and you have to do work to make that happen, that stuff happens. And we are at no level of organization. We're not at the level of organization where, like, you could even have a successful regional general strike, much less anything like the R word. So we have to try to remove ourselves from the like thing, the temptation to moralize in any direction, and the temptation to get involved in the discourse and let the discourse shape what we think. Because I hate to tell you, but I remember Twitter debates from like 10 years ago, and I remember how much they fucking mattered. Usually not a lot.
Well, we're going to go to the champagne room. If you are a patron of Varn Vlog or JG's Parallax Views, I will send you, them the link so you guys can watch the show as well. If you are a patron of This Is Revolution podcast, of course, the link is already up, or a paid YouTube subscriber, the link is already up. We look forward to seeing you guys and interacting with your comments a lot more in the champagne room as we actually play them on the screen as the show goes on. Thank you guys so much for taking.
Wait. Can I ask a question?
Oh my God, a woman has a question.
No, we haven't heard enough from the Vagina American in the room.
Wow.
I just want to know if Alex is going to be in the champagne room, because I want to talk about your pumpkin shirt and revolutionary violence and Lenin and the Romanovs and the House of Special Purpose.
I'll come in the champagne room for about a half an hour. That's all I got. I got to get to bed early too.
I'll take it.
I'll be there for about a half an hour.
Okay.
Pascal, are you okay? Because we have a theory that Booker T. Washington has been snatching your Wi-Fi. Are you okay?
He just snatched it a couple of seconds ago.
Yeah. That's the theory right now. Whenever you disappear, they're like, Booker T got him again.
He snatched Jason's sleeves today, too.
That's not Booker T. That's Booger T. That's Booker T. Washington coming for you guys.
We coming for you.
Oh! Don't say it, Booker. Not on the main show, brother. Not on the main show.
It's a good thing I'm not monetized ever.
Thank you, guys. We'll see you in the champagne room. And wait a minute. We are
out.
Peace.
Out.
This edition of Parallax Views brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to
Galen, Matt,
Gunnar, Mark,
Simon,
Alexander, Catherine,
G,
Tilo, Emilia,
Jeremy,
Jeff,
WV,
John,
Bert,
Brian, Elliot,
Darko,
Tilo, Luke, Michael, Brace,
James,
Nick,
Mark M, Mersham,
Galen,
Gareth,
Arlen,
Tilo, Luke,
Bo,
Christopher, Michael,
Gigadelic Media,
Will,
Chance, Chase,
JC,
Dan,
Big Bob, David H, Y, Kellerman, Sadeed 13,
Kathleen, David,
Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast, Jamie, Enoch,
Gary,
Max,
Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho,
Brian,
Nobody, Thomas, and Dano.
Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. As always, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that being said, until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. If nothing else, if we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. new forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.